I do rise to address this motion, the matter of urgency, that the United Nations Resolution 2758 of the 25th of October 1971 does not establish the People's Republic of China's sovereignty over Taiwan and does not determine the future status of Taiwan in the United Nations, nor Taiwan's participation or Taiwanese people's participation in UN agencies or international organisations. Now, this is urgent because of the growing risk to the security and the stability in the Indo-Pacific. And one of the key risks in this whole process is the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. It's important not just for the human rights of the 23.5 million people in the democracy that is Taiwan, but the impact that decreasing security and conflict there would have on the rules-based order that underpins peace and security around the world, but also the global economic impact, which Australia would not escape, and people like David Uren in a paper in ASPI highlighting that Australia's GDP would go back by 6% and per capita take-home pay would decrease by 14% if there were conflict across the Taiwan Strait. So what does a 1971 resolution in the UN have to do with these risks? Well, if we go back to documents from the time, the National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, speaking with the Premier of China, Zhou Enlai, established the fact that the PRC was concerned that what was then known as the Albanian Resolution did not mention Taiwan. It did not address the status of Taiwan. It did not establish PRC sovereignty over Taiwan, and it did not determine Taiwan's participation in international bodies. So that is in accordance with Australia's One China policy, and many countries similarly have a policy that recognises the original intent of that motion, as opposed to what the PRC call their One China principle, which they have since that time sought to impose. Now, what does that look like for Australia? Well, we see in 2018 Qantas, along with 36 airlines around the world, being coerced by the PRC to change how Taiwan and Taipei were listed on their websites. We see the Marriott Hotel coerced into changing their practice. We see pressure placed upon UN bodies such as the World Health Organization to limit the ability of Taiwan to participate. We see the UN Legal Office for Taiwan Affairs changing their language from the original intent, which included the ambiguity, to adopting the PRC narrative. We see the UN refusing accreditation to civil society bodies and NGOs that don't toe the line on the PRC narrative. We see universities in Australia coerced and pressured by the PRC to adopt their narrative because of funding for institutions and student bodies, etc., that are there. We also see at events such as the Kimberley initiatives, the dealing with diamonds, etc., the Kimberley process, we see unruly and unprofessional behaviour by Chinese representatives seeking to shut the process down until Taiwan's representatives are excluded. This rewriting of history is what George Orwell foresaid when he said, if you can control the past, you can control the future. Cognitive science indicates a thing called the illusory truth effect, that if you say it often enough, people will start to believe it, which means that the perception of truth will increase and therefore potential increase for legitimacy. Now, that also increases the risk of conflict, and the stakes of that conflict are high. So if the PRC wins acceptance of its position in the international community on this matter, then Taiwan's security and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait are at increased risk. The PRC will continue to advocate and claim that legally and politically it would be lawful for them to use force to achieve unification. The PRC would argue that measures by the international community to prevent or deter that are unlawful. And more broadly, acceptance of the PRC's views on the legal meaning and impact of Resolution 2758 would weaken the UN's integrity and increase challenges to the international rules-based order. In the interest of peace, security and stability in our region, it's important and urgent to restore both the status quo for the peoples of Taiwan with respect to engagement in international bodies, but also to restore an accurate understanding of the original scope and intent of UN Resolution 2758.
and I rise to speak on the urgency motion, which is that the United Nations Resolution 2758 of the 25th of October 1971 does not establish the People's Republic of China's sovereignty over Taiwan and does not determine the future status of Taiwan in the United Nations, nor Taiwanese participation in UN agencies or international organisations. Madam President, it's a privilege to rise and speak in support of this motion and co-sponsor it with my colleague in the chambers here, Senator David Fawcett. I've spoken many times in this Senate chamber about the importance of every member of our parliament, particularly in our outreach and interactions with the international community, of being impelled to promote the fundamental principles of democracy: equality, freedom, solidarity and respect for the rule of law. These are values and practices that apply not only to Australian society, but they are the observable moral benchmarks of all authentic and functioning democracies. Sadly, they are not universally evident. It was a privilege, along with Senator Fawcett, to attend the recent IPAC conference in Taiwan. I now stand with him to move this urgency motion with the intent of supporting the United Nations Resolution 2758 and Australia's official position on matters related to Taiwan. In 1971, the United Nations Resolution 2758 was passed with the intention of granting the seat occupied by the Republic of China in the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council to the People's Republic of China. The resolution does not mention Taiwan or address its political status. Despite this fact, there is an ongoing and egregious campaign currently underway from the PRC to reinterpret the resolution and misrepresent what the resolution actually does. It must be made crystal clear and affirmed without question or doubt in this place that Resolution 2758 does not establish PRC sovereignty over Taiwan. Any assertion to the contrary is not just false, but should be considered an active attempt to undermine the true and genuine objectives of the resolution. We must be diligent in opposing such disinformation, because attacks on truth are also attacks on democracy. It is deeply regrettable that the representatives of the PRC continue to distort the meaning of Resolution 2758 in support of the One China principle and to alter historical documents to change Taiwan to Taiwan Province of China. We cannot allow any individual or group to undermine the genuine meaning and importance of Resolution 2758, as such action is in direct opposition to both Australia's initial intention in supporting the 1971 resolution and our current position on China and Taiwan. It is crucial in this place and throughout the world that we are strident in our condemnation of deceit and resolute in our promotion of truth and historical fact. It is regretful that the People's Republic of China misrepresents Australia's own One China policy. Australia's long-standing and bipartisan One China policy facilitates political ties with the People's Republic of China and also close unofficial ties with Taiwan. Taiwan is a leading Indo-Pacific democracy and an important partner for Australia. We share with Taiwan an interest in open, inclusive and stable Indo-Pacific region. We maintain close positive trade and economic ties with Taiwan, including working with Taiwan on the Green Climate Fund and the UN Development Program to fund the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project. Australia is Taiwan's second most popular destination for overseas education, and around 200,000 Taiwanese have had working holidays in Australia. Australia has long supported Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organisation. It's not in the interests of the international community to have 24 million Taiwanese excluded. The International Civil Aviation Organisation and the World Health Organisation are global bodies. They are examples of critical information sharing and global planning bodies that require global representation. In the context of active misinformation, it is also crucial to put on the record that Australia's official policy does not preclude parliamentarians from meeting with the Taiwanese community or indeed travelling to Taiwan. Just last month, I was privileged to travel to Taipei with Senator Fawcett and New South Wales MLA Hugh McDermott to engage with parliamentarians from Taiwan and around the world to discuss the importance of regional stability, democracy and respect for sovereignty. Let me be clear. Australia does not want any unilateral change to the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. We share with all people and nations of goodwill a deep interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within our region. Australia's leaders across the parliament have expressed concern, and we seek to create no confusion about United Nations Resolution 2758.
Acting Deputy President, I acknowledge Senator Fawcett and Senator O'Neill in their moving of this urgency motion. In doing so, recognise them as two of many parliamentarians, myself included, who over many years have visited Taiwan and done so as part of the respectful relationship that we have, and that I would expect many more to visit in the years ahead. Acting Deputy President, in 2022 Australia marked the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties with the People's Republic of China, established through a joint communique between our nations in 1972. Although our relations have ebbed and flowed throughout this time, the strength of our people-to-people and business-to-business relations are a testament to the goodwill of citizens in both our nations. Australia's act of establishing diplomatic relations with the PRC had followed United Nations Resolution 2758 on 25 October 1971, which after 22 years of debate recognised the international standing of the People's Republic of China as the, quote, only legitimate representative of China to the United Nations, and also as, quote, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. UN Resolution 2758, however, did not mention Taiwan and did not determine sovereignty over Taiwan. Australia's joint communique of 1972 with the PRC, establishing our diplomatic ties, did mention Taiwan, but similarly did not determine sovereignty over Taiwan, instead simply acknowledging the position of the PRC that Taiwan was a province of the PRC. This established the principles that have consistently guided Australia's One China policy since 1972. We do not recognise Taiwan as a country, but we maintain unofficial contacts with Taiwan, promoting economic, trade and cultural interests. Indeed, just as our people-to-people and business-to-business ties with the PRC have grown through the ensuing 52 years, they have also grown with Taiwan, which we welcome. Taiwan is a major trading partner for Australia and supplies critical componentry into global supply chains. A strong Taiwan is good for Australia and good for all economies in our region, contributing to growth that all regional partners should be striving for. We in Australia respect the will of the Taiwanese people, including the democratic principles they share with Australia, and we look to strengthen Australia's ties with Taiwan, as we also seek to grow areas of mutually beneficial cooperation with the PRC. Australia has consistently reiterated continued support for a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues according to the will of the people and without resorting to threats or coercion. There should be no unilateral change to the status quo. There is no justification for the escalation in military activities or acts targeted at Taiwan that we have seen too much of in recent years. Such actions risk instability, miscalculation or misadventure, and they should cease. We also support Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organisations, as a member where statehood is not a prerequisite, and as an observer or guest where statehood is a prerequisite for membership. One example is our support for Taiwan's meaningful participation in the work of the World Health Organization and Taiwan's participation as an observer in the World Health Assembly. As was demonstrated during the COVID-19 disaster, such viruses do not respect borders. Taiwan's meaningful participation in the forums and technical committees of the WHO would be to the benefit of the people of Taiwan and the world. As a former Trade Minister, I note that Taiwan enjoys a status in the World Trade Organization and under international trade law equal to that of the PRC or Australia or indeed of Hong Kong. On trade policy, we should approach any engagement with Taiwan or requests from Taiwan on the merits of the case presented, as in should be the case in all matters consistent with the principles I've outlined. Acting Deputy President, Taiwan and the PRC are important, valued partners of Australia. Our relations with each are clearly defined, and they should never be misrepresented. Our ambitions are positive and peaceful towards all, and this is an approach we urge all partners to share in.
Thank you very much, Acting Deputy President, and I also rise to add my contribution to the urgency motion that's proposed by yourself and my good friend Senator O'Neill. Australia has long endorsed Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organisations, and this is a view that the government reiterates today. Excluding Taiwan and its 24 million inhabitants from international organisations would constrain the world from being able to engage effectively and develop solutions on the transnational threats that we are facing. Bodies like the World Health Organisation or the International Civil Aviation Organisation require international representation, and the government will continue to uphold this view. It is important to note, as we've heard from previous senators, that the United Nations Resolution 2758 was adopted in 1971, doesn't address the political status of Taiwan. It doesn't authorise the People's Republic of China, the PRC, to represent Taiwan in the United Nations system. It doesn't extend the PRC's sovereignty over Taiwan. It is rather regretful that as years have passed, so too has the push by the PRC and its representatives to reinterpret Resolution 2758 in support of its One China principle and to change the meaning of these historical documents. Australia has a long-standing and bipartisan One China policy and maintains close, unofficial ties with Taiwan. In May this year, I was very proud to co-lead with Senator Fawcett a bipartisan parliamentary delegation to Taiwan for the inauguration of the President and the Vice President. The visit for the inauguration was entirely consistent with Australia's One China policy. And during this historic event, I had the great pleasure of meeting the President and the Vice President to reaffirm Australia's relationship with Taiwan and our very strong people-to-people ties. Australia enjoys a very strong Taiwanese diaspora of 50,000, and around 200,000 Taiwanese have had a working holiday arrangements in our great country. Indeed, the economic, trade and cultural interests Australia shares with Taiwan cannot be understated. Taiwan is one of Australia's top 10 two-way goods and services trading partners, worth around $33.6 billion, and is the sixth largest destination for Australian exports, worth around $23.5 billion. Australia is also Taiwan's largest energy supplier, and many people will not know this. We contribute around 2/3 of Taiwan's coal and almost half of its natural gas. We'll continue to advance this energy cooperation by supporting Taiwan and in their uptake of renewable energy on its pathway to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And most importantly, Taiwan shares Australia's interest in and a steadfast commitment to a rules-based, open, inclusive and stable Indo-Pacific region. As Indo-Pacific democracies, both countries firmly believe in a peaceful and stable region. This shared interest is important today more than it has ever been the case. And as has been reiterated by our Foreign Minister, Senator Wong, Australia doesn't want to see any unilateral change to the current status across the Taiwan Strait. The government has repeatedly expressed its concerns about the PRC's military and Coast Guard activity around Taiwan in recent times. The military brinkmanship is reckless and irresponsible. Pursuing peace and stability is in all our interests because the alternative is too catastrophic to consider. Australia will continue to engage constructively and take steps to promote stability and transparency so that the region can live in a peaceful and prosperous manner and continue to be a region in which sovereignty is respected. And in this place, I will continue to advocate for the right of Taiwanese people to live free from the threat of violence against them and their vibrant democracy.
Thank you. I rise to speak in support of the urgency motion, and I commend you, Senator Fawcett and Senator O'Neill, for moving it. It is unquestionable that there has been a concerted attempt by the Chinese government and, unfortunately, by some here in the Australian community to make incorrect claims about the sovereignty of Taiwan and the position of both the United Nations and Australia in regard to Taiwan. This is an urgent matter because it is of great concern for peace and security in our region. As this urgency motion makes clear, the United Nations Resolution 2758 does not establish the People's Republic of China's sovereignty over Taiwan, nor does it determine Taiwanese participation in international organisations. In regard to Australia's policy, the Australian position is not that we agree with the PRC's One China principle. Australia's policy is that we acknowledge that the Chinese government holds a particular position regarding Taiwan, not that we endorse that position. That is a significant distinction, and it's important that Australia's position over such a critical issue is not misrepresented in our country, either inadvertently or deliberately. It matters because the Chinese government has made repeated public statements about what it refers to as reunification of Taiwan and has specifically stated that it does not rule out any measures, including military force, to achieve that aim. And the Chinese government has, on a repeated basis, conducted military exercises practising encirclement of Taiwan and regularly sends fighter jets into Taiwan's air defence zone. Nobody in Australia wants to see conflict in our region. But we have to be clear-eyed about the Chinese government's stated intentions and their aggressive and dangerous behaviour. The justification that the Chinese government puts forward for the threat of using force to take over governance of Taiwan is their claim that Taiwan is part of China and must be recognised as such. When people in Australia repeat that claim, what they are doing is supporting a justification being put forward for the use of military force by the Chinese government. And that is why it is so egregious for a former Australian Prime Minister, Mr Paul Keating, to label Taiwan Chinese real estate, as he did in a recent interview. Mr Keating falsely claims that the whole world recognises China and Taiwan as one country. This is false, and it is not simply a matter of a private citizen expressing a view, as some claim. As a former Prime Minister, the Australian taxpayer pays for Mr Keating to maintain an office. I think there are questions to be asked about why Australians should pay to support a private office for a former official who consistently pushes a false narrative about Australia's policy, especially when that false narrative aligns with that being pushed by foreign regimes such as the Chinese Communist Party. The question is the motion moved by Senators Fawcett and O'Neill be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.